This is Trailer Rewind.
I never saw this land when it was green, before the drought came. My father did, even as the fights over water first divided states. He always believed in the land.
Welcome, everyone, to another TNR short. We're calling this one Trailer Rewind, and the idea here is to go back and look at films that Pete and Andy talked about in their trailers section from the regular show and actually go watch some of those films because sometimes they kind of fall by the wayside. The one that we're going to talk about today is called Young Ones, and this one, Steve, you picked this one. Do you want to talk about maybe what got you interested in talking about Young Ones today?
Sure. This was a trailer pick. It was Andy's pick back from August 22nd, 2014 on their episode of For a Few Dollars More, I believe. And as I was looking back at trailers, this one stuck out. Andy had a lot of enthusiasm about this. He really, he commented on the cast and talked about this as this sci-fi Western. And that was a genre that I thought was really interesting to look at how this is handled. Sort of a different take on the plethora of dystopian films we have to really bring it back to something more similar to a Western. And so that was something that appealed to me why I selected this. Also the cast, it's got Michael Shannon. Always enjoyed his work in films, well, aside from, Man of Steel. Now, Michael Shannon was in a film a few years ago.
Is it Take Shelter? Is that the one?
Take Shelter. That's the one. Take Shelter. So I was really impressed with his performance in that. And so I thought, again, a smaller film to see what he can really bring to this. But we also have Nicholas Hoult. We have Cody Smith-McPhee and Elle Fanning. So just a lot of recognizable faces from much larger films. So I was really intrigued with that cast to see what was it about this story that drew them into this. So I thought there must be something really interesting to pull this cast together. So
I'm glad you talk about story too, because that kind of was the most interesting thing for me about it. I mean, in general, I actually was really surprised by this movie. I liked it quite a bit, and I didn't expect much. My expectations going in were pretty low, and there were some times where it felt like it was a small movie or that it wasn't able to convert on some of the things that it did. But it surprised me in the way that the story seemed really well thought out. It seemed to follow the original plan of where it was going in this sort of 3-chapter setup, and I ended up feeling underwhelmed in the first chapter, but by the time I got to the end, especially the 3rd chapter, I thought it was really well conceived, and I do think it's a good movie. I think, especially if you like this genre, I think you're going to love this movie.
Yeah, well, I think it really grabbed me from the beginning. If we look at how it really sets the tone, we've got just a very short introductory piece before we get into what we're told is chapter 1, which is Ernest's chapter. But we have a small scene of 2 thieves trying to break into a little shed out in the middle of the desert. And we see that Ernest sneaks up on these guys that are trying to break into his shed. And one of the guys Ernest has already shot one of the guys, and the other is there, hands up against the shed, and he wants to turn around, and Ernest is warning him not to. And the guy is, very flustered, and he's got to go to the bathroom. He doesn't want to soil himself, and so he's trying to talk Ernest into letting him turn around, and Ernest tells him not to, or he's going to shoot him. The guy wets himself. We see that. We think, okay, he's telling the truth. He's just, he's the guy that got in over his head. But as he turns around, we see that he's put his hand into his pants and has pulled the little pistol out, and Ernest shoots him.
Yeah.
So we see that, really what kind of guy Ernest is. And I thought that was a really nice way of setting up the thieves trying to get in to get the water. We know about this water shortage. We learn a little bit about Ernest and the type of world that it is, sort of that Western, out on the frontier. Each man is a law unto himself. And I thought that was a nice way to really set the stage for these 3 chapters that we were going to see play out regarding each of these men that the stories focus on.
Yeah, I thought that was really clever, and really kind of showed that it's this sort of sci-fi Western thing. I thought that was right away. It set the tone. It said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to have this realm of justice while everyone's sort of scraping by to get water, and water becomes this, huge sort of negotiation piece for everything that goes on in the film, and it set it up really well.
Yeah, so the first chapter focuses on Ernest, and we learn a little bit about him, his family. He's got a son and daughter that he's taking care of. We also see that he's got a job, which is he's got a donkey that he and his son Jerome use to basically, sort of like the postal service, they run a route to carry supplies.
Mostly booze.
And well, mostly booze. Donkey breaks its leg. They have to put it down, which puts them in a position of they may not have this job anymore unless he's got a way to transport his supplies. So they go off to an auction. They buy, and this was something that Andy had commented on, which was the Google robot dog,
which was the star of the movie.
It was the star.
That's a real thing.
Exactly.
It was awesome. I was questioning myself the whole time. I'm like, how are they getting it to act this way? And it's because there's this real thing that exists out in the world. That's the Google. What do they call it? The big dog? Is that what they call it?
Yeah, the big dog. Yeah.
It was awesome. It was awesome, and it was real.
It's real, and I thought they used it really well as sort of a key point in the story. So Ernest has it; he's using it to, basically transport supplies, and that's where we sort of are introduced to the character of Flem, played by Nicholas Hoult, who is in a bidding war with Ernest for this robot, and we then learn that Flem is also courting Ernest's daughter. Right. So there's sort of a bit of scheming going on. Flem is trying to sort of get his way into taking over that job to earn some money, working his way into the family. Did you
know in that first chapter that he was trying to get the farm? That was one of the things that I thought was really interesting as you get through the pieces of the film, is that I just felt like he was always just trying to get something, in this sort of dystopian world, that he wanted just something. And that's why he was trying to take the job first. And then it just kind of elaborated in this really neat way that all of a sudden it was this master plan. And he became a really sophisticated antagonist as we went through the film, as it started small with just trying to take a little thing, the daughter or the donkey or, the big dog, whatever it is. But then it grew into this sort of master plan. And I liked how they elaborated that too.
Oh yeah, he's really this opportunist. Whenever he can take a situation and turn it to his advantage, he does. Yep. He finds a way. And I think, I don't know that it was his initial plan. I think he wanted the job because he kept, telling Ernest, let me do it for you, because then I can negotiate with those guys to bring water to our land. Because one of the stops is this water camp, and I think they're the government employees, and they are highly involved with the distribution of water, building out the water lines. And apparently Flem believes that he's going to be able to negotiate a deal to bring water line that Ernest hasn't been able to. Yeah. He eventually does, but the circumstances by which he's able to do that didn't exist when he's really confronting Ernest about that. It's because of things that happen later on. He's able to say, oh, okay, well, because of that, here's why you guys are going to have to work this deal. Yep. Yeah. So it's always working each angle, trying to create an opportunity that he can then twist to his advantage. So it's a really interesting character. It reminded me a lot of some novels like early 20th century. There was a novel called McTeague that was made into a film called Greed. And it's basically about a woman and her husband, and they win the lottery, and there's a third man that comes in to break up the family to get at the money. But it really felt, the story, this structure, reminded me a lot of these sort of early pulp 20th century novels where it's just family drama and opportunity and greed and money. But there was something with the sci-fi setting that made it a little fresh. You've got the robot, and the robot dog and the drones, and just sort of a society that's broken down. So instead of being on the edge of a civilization that's developing, we're on the edge of a civilization in decline. Yep. Which I thought worked really well. I think the story, that was the kind of thing that I really liked about the story, is that I think that it developed, and it developed in a way that I totally did not expect from a film like this. And that's why I asked the question about whether in the book that you're talking about, it's kind of clear that someone's going in to try and access the wealth. But because of this sort of desperate life that the world is leading in this movie, because there's no water, it's almost like Flem will just do anything to get ahead. And his aspirations become larger as the different ways for him to betray the home family become an opportunity for him. I was impressed with how the story grew as the film moved on. Oh yeah, so he then he sort of replaces Ernest. He becomes the head of the household there after Ernest's death. Yeah, because the casting. I guess there is a significant age difference between Nicholas Hoult and Cody Smith-McPhee, but sort of look like brothers. But Flem, he really takes that as, I'm the man of the house now. I'm responsible for the bills. He really has that maturity of establishing himself as the patriarch now. And Jerome has always been sort of the shy, meek son, not a very outgoing personality. And we see his slow transformation as he learns, little bits and pieces about what's going on in his family. And I thought that was an interesting transformation that happens in chapter 3, with chapter 2 really being about Flem and acquiring sort of the homestead, and then being able to bring the water, and then the profit that comes from now being able to farm. I believe it's a wheat farm that they have, so that he's now, the prosperous rancher out there on his land, protecting his land. He's got the money. He's able to take care of the mother who's in the hospital, which I thought was another little interesting futuristic twist on that, of, the mother who's off in the hospital, instead of it being something from, late 19th, early 20th century, like tuberculosis or something. She's been, and I believe we see a small flashback. There was a car accident. It's sort of suggested that Ernest was drunk and was driving, was in a car accident. His wife was basically paralyzed. So she's in a hospital with this robotic rig that allows her to walk and move, but it's still something out remote in the hospital. But Flem is now able to also continue to provide for the mother, as well as his additional responsibilities. That's really what I see as the development of chapter 2.
Yep.
And then as we get to the turn that happens in chapter 3, which is interesting because of the big dog and what happens with the role that it plays in Flem's plans and opportunities.
I spoke to Robbie today.
What's that?
On the radio. He was looking for you. Robbie was.
What did he say?
Just said he's looking for you.
Where is he?
He didn't say.
What did he say?
Just said he was looking for you. That was it.
What, on the 10 meter?
Yeah.
Did you give a channel to radio back on?
He said he was on someone else's handle.
What, someone else's handle or someone else's radio?
Handle, I think.
Handle. Huh.
Yeah.
That's a lie.
I don't know. It's just what he said.
No, not him. You, that's a lie, that last part.
Flem.
Robbie doesn't have a radio, so he doesn't have a handle, so he didn't call here. Tell her. I saw what you thought. I saw what you just thought.
Flem, stop.
Robbie called looking for me, that's what you said?
Yes.
And you spoke to him?
Yep.
Cody Smith McPhee. If we talk about the acting, I felt like he was the only person who really kind of took it to another level, and that might have been by design, because we are seeing his transformation in the 3 chapters of the story. All the other actors, it kind of felt like one note to me, that there really wasn't a whole lot of diversity in what they were doing. But I don't know that I didn't have a problem with it. I just didn't love any of the other characters, and that might be on purpose too. So if it's supporting the course of the story, I'm okay with it. And I was really impressed with Cody Smith McPhee, actually, that the when he discovers, through the use of the robot dog, the real sort of the evil that has befallen his family. I think that's a really powerful scene, and that was the probably my favorite shot of the film, is watching him realize, sort of the lies that have been brought to him, and the tragedy that's been following his family was caused by some person.
Oh yeah, that as he's sitting there in front of the monitor watching sort of the historical record from the big dog of what it's witnessed, and then what he does with that, the game that he plays on Flem,
which I thought was great,
was brilliant. It's sort of playing the "you don't know that I know what you did," and game of I believe it's Robbie. He called on the CB, and he knows that Robbie's dead, but Flem doesn't know that he knows, and sort of the gamesmanship that goes on of trying to manipulate Flem to get him to play out, basically what Jerome's end game there is, to get him out in the wilderness again. His vengeance
right.
on Flem was just very nicely played.
Yeah, it was suspenseful and interesting, and every turn we thought he was going to get caught, but he made it through. I really liked that part.
What did you think about as part of that journey? He's got to leave sort of the barren wasteland where they are and travel into the city, because the big dog has returned to its manufacturer after it was damaged, and he's got that travel through sort of the waypoints and being smuggled into, we see sort of that not the entire country is this desolate wasteland. We see a little bit of the civilized side of things, and what did you think of how that was portrayed?
I thought it was it's a really interesting question, because I think there's a couple different things in that. I really thought as part of the story, I thought it was great to go back into the city and affect that part of the story. As the question of having the character of Anna there and the showing of the other parts of the world, I thought some of that could have probably been cut. And the only reason why I say that is because that was part of the world building in this movie that isn't really present in some of the rest of the stuff. And I really liked when it wasn't present, when they sort of gave the audience credit that they were going to come along for the ride and they didn't have to explain why the world is the way it is, or why we have a robot dog, or why those kind of things are. And that was one of the things that I thought was a strength of the film, was that it didn't have to explain how futuristic it was. So as far as making the big thing of going through the gates and bribing the folks and that sort of story there, I felt like it was more of an aside and was more of a distraction from the story. And I understand why it's important to have for the story, but there was probably a little much there. I felt the same way about the mother, though, too, to be honest. I mean, we need that for the story in certain places, but there were certain scenes, for example, when the mother was saying to Jerome that, well, does he make her happy? Then he's a good man, and stuff like that. It didn't affect the story at all that they had that conversation. It didn't really affect my feeling about what was going to happen, and the vengeance still takes place. So that felt unnecessary as well. So again, when it felt like it was over world building, I didn't think it was necessary, because one of the things I loved is that they didn't feel like they had to do that most of the time.
Yeah, it reminded me a lot of like Mad Max Fury Road. There's a lot of things that you see going on that the characters understand. It's part of their world. We get little to no explanation. There's the painted or dyed birds it's like a bird race or something. They're all released at one time. There's some wagering that goes on. That's never explained. It was just okay. It adds sort of to the atmosphere of this world. Yeah, exactly. That's a great word, flavor. There's a lot of flavor, and that's something that the story moves along very nicely. I thought very tightly. We have some of those asides that maybe could have been, they serve some purpose, but we don't get a lot of over explanation of why there is no water, how civilization is broken down. We hear on the radio things about the government and the settlers. We don't get into a lot of the politics or anybody, monologuing about any of those things. We just get it as you say, adding flavor to the world, which I thought played to the strength of this film. It kept it really grounded in the characters, which I think was really the strength of this film, to watch them transform. And as it ended, I asked myself if everybody really got what they deserved by the end of the film. Was this a tragedy or not?
Yeah,
because it's got. I thought it balanced it. There's Ernest's death is somewhat tragic, but he's clearly got some demons in his past that he's paying for.
Right.
Well, the women, I think those, you've got the mother and the daughter, and they are really there's not much there to them. They serve sort of like chess pieces. They're moved to serve functions in the story to either motivate or drive the male characters, but they themselves really don't do much,
right?
Which was a bit disappointing for me. So you've got the three men, you've got Ernest, Flem, and Jerome, really, and what they each get or deserve in the end of the film. And I felt satisfied with where everything ends.
Yeah, it's described as a tragedy. Most places where I see descriptions of the film, it's described as a tragedy. I don't really feel that way. I think it's kind of that vengeance story, and it surprised me in the way that it approached that, and I was happy with it. I agree. I think I was satisfied by the fact that they wrapped it up, and that I felt like everyone got what they deserved. I thought the ending was solid in terms of that.
Anything about script, director that you wanted to touch on?
The dialogue in general, nothing really stuck out to me as great dialogue. but that's not a problem either. I mean, you had mentioned that you thought the transformation of the characters was a strong point. I really felt that the sort of depth of the story here was really great because, again, I didn't have heavy expectations coming into it. I felt like it was going to be a small film, and in general it was, but it really surprised me in the way that it was deep in terms of story.
Yeah, and then it's directed by Jake Paltrow, and this was something that I believe Pete commented on when they were discussing the trailer. So he's the brother of Gwyneth Paltrow.
Brother of Gwyneth.
Yeah, doesn't have a lot. I think some TV and one other film to his credit.
And they shot in not South Africa. They shot in Africa, which I think is pretty amazing when you consider that he doesn't have a film and they were out there.
Yeah, I was really, I'm looking forward to see what his next project is.
Sure.
This is something that feels like a young filmmaker, honing his craft. It to me, looking at this being sort of one of his first films, I thought it didn't suffer from a lot of things that a smaller, young filmmaker may suffer from, which is gaps in the plot or trying to over-explain, not having really developed characters.
Yeah.
And he made a lot of bold choices, breaking it into these 3 chapters, focusing on each of these men. And I thought it was handled very well to keep that balance, to keep the story moving along. So I thought it was very competently, assembled film.
And he was writer and director. And with his first film, he was as well, which was The Good Night. And I'm not familiar with that, but 2007. So looking at the cinematography, there was a lot of center focus stuff, which I noticed a lot of it. The first few times I saw it, I thought it was interesting. The first real shot of the film, when you see the 2 thieves you mentioned with the gun, that's a center focus shot with everything kind of down the barrel of the gun. They used it a lot, so that was a little much. But some of them were really poignant and important. And I mentioned my favorite shot of the film was that sort of pivotal point in chapter 3 when we're watching Jerome go through the transformation or learning about the actual tragedy that has already happened. That was really profound and powerful to use for the center shot. So that's what I noticed the most. I didn't notice a whole lot of other super interesting activity on the part of the camera.
No, I think it didn't do anything that drew attention to itself other than some of those centered shots. At the end, after chapter 3 ends, we do get sort of the cast. We get
I like that
sequence at the end where centered with a brown curtain sort of blowing in the wind behind them with actor's name and character, almost
super clever,
very very theatrical. I thought of introducing the cast that way, added a sense of, again, sort of something outside of the realm of film, breaking this into chapters,
kind
having
of like
this
Old
very
West theatrical almost.
Exactly.
I loved it.
Yeah. So again, some nice choices that I felt were made for sound reasons, not just for the sake of being artsy. Yes, exactly. So
1, 2, 3,
overall,
clap. Yeah, exactly.
Yes. So it was a lot of fun. Again, this was something that I was surprised at how much I enjoyed it, because usually with sometimes a smaller film that's really flown under the radar, it could be a big disappointment. It could be some unrealized potential. And I was not angry at this film. It didn't frustrate me. I enjoyed it. I felt that there were some things it could have maybe gone a little bit more. It didn't keep me. I didn't come out of this saying, "Wow, this is a great film." But it's definitely something that I would recommend for people that really looking for a film, interested in a character piece. Not something necessarily for somebody that's looking for a lot of action, because I wouldn't say it's slow. It takes its time, but it does move along. So I thought the pacing was well handled, and just the cutting of the film, editing. There's some big jumps, the way things are handled, but done very artfully to keep the story moving along. So overall, this is something I definitely would recommend. It's on my flick chart. I nuked my flick chart about 2 years ago, and I got to a point where I was ranking like Sister Act against My Big Fat Greek Wedding, and I hadn't seen either of those in 20 years. I'm like, I can't. What do you do? So Sister I nuked
Act.
Everything.
Definitely Sister Act.
Yes.
Oh wait, no, Sister Act 2 is the really good one.
Okay.
Sorry.
So I've just been adding films as I see them now, so that I can sort of, with a fresh mind, put them in. So this came in at 115 out of 166.
Okay.
It bumped up against Robot and Frank to sort of make it in the first half, and that's another small film that I really enjoyed. And I think because it's a little bit lighter, it won out in that, and that kept Young Ones sort of condemned to the bottom half of my list. But it's still a solid showing, I think, and I expect it will hold its place as I continue to add films to this, because it was something that I found really, really satisfying.
What's the one right above it, and what's the one right below it?
So it's right below Dallas Buyers Club.
Oh wow, that's strong.
Yeah, and
for this
and
movie,
then
really strong.
Just Andy will appreciate this. It is just above the Joe Show. That's the documentary about Sheriff Joe Arpaio.
Oh, interesting.
Andy worked
That's
on.
cool that that's on your flick chart.
Yeah.
I also did my own flick chart on this deal too. And the one thing that I want to say before I talk about that is that the only time that the film felt cheap to me or felt really small is when they did try to put in effects. So I did feel that one of the greatest strengths of this film was when they just kind of put it open and just were shooting models or shooting things and just kind of letting it be. When they did fly one drone over a scene at one point, and it looked really fake. And then a couple other times when they were doing the flashback to the car accident, for example, or they were trying to when they were trying to be artsy with effects, it felt really it felt cheap to me.
Yeah.
And that was indicative of the size of the film, really. So when they weren't using it, it was great. And when they did try to use it, it just didn't work for me. So, and that's kind of the thing that told me, a relatively new filmmaker wants to put these things in, but didn't really fit with the film. So for me, it ended up, I think, a little bit lower when we think about proportions here. And, for everybody who's going to listen to this, we do have, we have our film board flick chart, and then the Pete and Andy have their own flick chart for the films that they've done. A few dollars more, where this trailer comes from, will have its place on its flick chart. Steve and I have talked about how we should do this, and we have our own flick charts as well. So that's why we thought we'd talk about it in terms of the films that we've seen. So on my flick chart, I don't have all the films that I've seen in my life, but I do have all the ones that we've talked about or that that I can kind of put in context with the next reel. So mine went a little bit lower. You said 115 out of 160 for you. Is that right?
Yes, 115 out of 166.
So I'm 89 out of 102. And I think I'm generally really positive about this film, but it was tough for me to rank it against those sort of big, I'll just call it big budget films. I'm sure there was a sizable budget on this film too, but the sort of traditional sort of wide release films, because a lot of those, in the sort of tightness of those films, they end up getting higher for me. So for example, the one right above it for me is Divergent, which I don't feel good about doing that, but in general, that's the first one, right? And I actually kind of like the first one, even though it's so low. And then the one that it's right above for me is The Wolverine, which I feel totally good about. The Young Ones, on the strength of its story, being above all the crazy, terrible stuff that's in The Wolverine. So in general, it sounds like we both kind of liked it, which is neat. Yeah. And I'm excited to share this with Andy.
Oh, yeah. I think Andy will, we can definitely recommend this as a trailer pick that he needs to go back and to visit. I think Pete will probably enjoy this as well. And I think anybody that's looking for a really good, it's a sci-fi film with a low amount of sci-fi, more Western, with a good character focus to it is something that I think anybody looking for that type of film is going to enjoy this.
And we should mention another way that we're trying to find these films. So one of the things that we're doing in reviewing the trailers that Pete and Andy are doing is we're trying to find films that are readily available for people on either Netflix or Hulu or any sort of other digital place where you can grab it. I watched mine on Netflix. Is that where you watched it as well?
Yep, that's where I found this, on Netflix.
So you can find it on Netflix now, and that's probably how we will select these going forward as well. So if anyone sees something out there that's coming up on Netflix and wants to hear about what we think about it, that might be a thing to suggest to us as well. So thanks so much, and we will sort of post when something new like this is coming up so that people can watch and take part with us in that way as well.
All right.
Thanks. Have a good night. We'll talk to you later.
Talk to you later.